Hello. Thank you for joining us today for the LaunchDarkly customer panel, Moving Faster Without Fear. I'm Aaliyah Abed, Director of Product Marketing at LaunchDarkly, and I'm joined here today with two of our lovely customers, Krista Sappington, who is VP IT Application Manager at BOK Financial, and Aaron Kerwin, who is the Director of Software Engineering at Datasite. Krista and Aaron, thanks for joining us today. Let's start out with some introductions. Can you tell us a little bit about your company, your role, and yourself? Let's start with you, Krista.
I work at BOK Financial. We are a top US 25 bank. We support customers within the consumer, commercial, wealth spaces, and we are across multiple markets across the US as well. I work in the digital solutions group as the IT application manager that is responsible for the digital product owners, technical analysts that support advancing their respective digital roadmaps on their products.
Awesome. How about you, Aaron?
Yeah, I'm a father, a husband. I live in Colorado. I love to snowboard in the winter and play golf in the summer. And then a little bit about, well, I suppose a little more background about me is I've been in software for 16 years as a software engineer, an architect, and a people manager. And then I work at Datasite, which is a global SaaS provider with customers that are in the investment banking, private equity firms, and also large corporations that do what's called corporate development, where they are looking to acquire smaller businesses. My role, my official title is Director of Software Engineering, as you noted, and my responsibilities are around quality assurance and then the SDLC at Datasite.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for joining us today. Krista, can you tell us a little bit about your key business initiatives that you and your team are supporting over the next 12 to 18 months, and what are some of the outcomes that you're hoping to achieve from those?
Yes, so on our digital roadmaps, our Scrum teams are working on advancing capabilities that are tied to our wealth platform modernization efforts. We want to invest in modernizing that application and its architecture so that we can continue to advance our features for our wealth customers, and so we're super excited to just continue to advance that this year. On the consumer side of the house, we are continuing to invest in building out more robust self-service digital card capabilities. What that means is our customers will be able to activate their debit card in their mobile app, change their PIN, set their PIN, and then add those bank cards to their Apple Wallet or Google Pay or Samsung Pay to start using our bank cards as they transact. Additionally, we continue to invest in working with our security partners to ensure that we are strengthening our security posture and effectively managing risk.
We'll get more into that later. Lots to consider in financial services for sure. Aaron, how about you? What kind of strategic initiatives are you supporting?
Yeah, so we actually just accomplished a really important one for us. It's called the New Look release. Really what it was is we've not refreshed our public website or our product application in over 4 years. We wanted to renew the user experience on both sides and launch it with high impact to our customers and also high adoption. And so some of our objectives with that was we did want it to be low risk. We didn't want to impact our customers. We did want to have high adoption. We also had to keep the old and the new look on the product or the application side running in parallel at the same time because it wouldn't be just a clean cut for our customers. It'd be more of a transition. And so that was one really large initiative we just completed 2 weeks ago. And then the other ones really, we just finished planning recently, and we have typically about 100 changes we like to put in production a quarter. And so with that, as far as my group and what I'm responsible for, back to the SDLC, is it's not so much about each individual initiative that we're concerned with, but more about how do we ensure that we deliver software at a high speed, high velocity, and low risk. And what can the quality assurance group and from an SDLC process perspective and tooling can we do to support that for all the business initiatives? And so that's really what we're trying to do in the near future.
What are some challenges that your technology organization is facing when it comes to software releases or DevOps initiatives in general?
For us, I feel like where we're currently going, so let me take a step back. We do a lot of releases, and so normally we can do anywhere from about 10 to 25 deployments to production a day. During our new look release, we hit somewhere around 40 deployments to production a day. And so from a deployment perspective, I think we do we believe we do a really good job. Some of the areas we've actually just started talking about is metrics, measuring, and being able to take almost like a next step in our maturity around a deployment and an SDLC perspective. And for us, right now, when you have 15, 25, 30 deployments a day in production, it's like a feed. And so that's really hard to stay on top of knowing what's going on, what's happening. Are you doing well? Are you not doing well? And it's very almost like a feel. And so we want to change that and going more into the direction of like metrics. And so that's a conversation we've been having. DORA metrics is one of those examples. There's lots of other ones that could facilitate how we mature around the SDLC and our organization. But I think for us, that's probably our next big challenge is how do we make that next maturity or evolutionary step in how we do releases.
Yeah, that's a conversation we have with a lot of our customers around how to measure. Okay, now you're doing it a lot, or are you doing it a lot compared to other high performers or industry standards? So I think that's a really interesting path to go down, and I look forward to hearing more. Krista, what about you? What kind of challenges is your technology organization facing around broader DevOps initiatives or software releases specifically?
I kind of echo your point. We have like our standard release schedules, and they've not really changed a whole lot. And we too want to understand where are we at? Like, are the rate of changes good? Are they successful? Like, what does good look like, and how do we also take it to the next level? And then I think another area where it's not necessarily like a problem per se, but it's more of an opportunity. We do have some really great tooling in place, and I think we have the opportunity to really invest our time in exploring what additional capabilities, and LaunchDarkly is one of them, on how we can really leverage those capabilities to help us get to the next level.
This whole summit is about reducing risk and giving developers more freedom and safety to innovate with guardrails. And so, Krista, I'd love to toss it over to you to talk a little bit about being in financial services. What types of guardrails and restrictions are you under, and how does that impact your release process? So would love to hear a little bit about your release process overall and how you think about managing risk and innovation.
So each digital roadmap and Scrum team have their own standard release process. We like to release every couple weeks across our web, mobile, and services. And with that, I guess kind of going back, we really have to understand what it is we're trying to accomplish and what we're going to build, because that's really going to set the tone for just the risk tolerance and considerations when we're building and architecting a solution. In some instances, if there's a high risk change or high complexity in the solution, we're going to want to talk about what are effective controls that we can have to either shut things down, redirect user experiences, influence the UX to tell them, hey, go do this thing. So it really depends on, what is the risk tolerance and level of control that we really need. And it's really a matter of working with our stakeholders, our Scrum team or the dev team, and operations to really understand that environment so that we can craft the design to really reflect what controls we need to have at the end of the day.
How about you, Erin? Being in SaaS versus financial services, I would think is a little bit different of a process, but can you tell us a little bit about your release process and how you think about managing risk and speed, especially when you're deploying so many times per day?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to start with kind of what our standard deployment or release process looks like. And we were talking a little earlier, and I think it's similar to what you're doing as well. So I'll start kind of real basic. Our developers will make a change on their local machine. They'll write tests for that. Then they'll do a PR that gets peer reviewed. Once that gets merged, that gets deployed to the development environment, which then has a whole bunch of other tests run. Their tests, additional tests, QA tests, and then that artifact will get tagged for verification. At that point, that artifact can get promoted to the next environment, which is the stage environment. Again, at that point, it's a more stable environment. We have a lot more tests that run. We have QA regression tests, QA smoke tests that are in a more stable place. Therefore, we believe the results are more accurate and therefore reducing our risk. Once those get tagged for verification, then we can deploy those to production. And so with that, we have, let me take a step back on then how many teams and how it works. We have 20 teams. They are made up of product managers, delivery managers, UX people, engineers, a front end and back end, and also QA. And so, well, what does that mean back to how many deploys we do in a day? Those teams can deploy 5 days a week, anytime they want. So long as that standard deployment process is followed, they can deploy 1 time a day, 5 times a day. So long as that occurs from the release perspective, they get the freedom to do it as they wish. And so we believe that that really reduces our risk as far as breaking production and impacting our customers, but allows us to move really, really fast on getting changes out very quickly. Now, that's our normal way of deploying. What we did with our new look release, going back to what were some of our objectives, we wanted to have the old look and the new look in production at the same time. We'd have customers on both. We also wanted to have a really big impact, and so we wanted to launch the new look in a way that was very crisp and clean and full-featured, so our customers, when they got it, they weren't getting a half-baked experience. They were getting a really full-fledged experience. That required months of development across multiple teams. And so we had to keep the SDLC flowing and have all of our normal processes and features going out to production while we were working on this whole new experience at the same time in parallel. And so what we did is we used LaunchDarkly as a piece of that. And while we use it for this, our teams will actually use LaunchDarkly anytime they feel that they want to manage risk. And so the engineer gets the autonomy to make that decision on, hey, this is a change that's risky. I want to use LaunchDarkly for that change. Or I don't need LaunchDarkly because they're confident in themselves managing the risk on that. So with the new look, we use LaunchDarkly, made one global flag that managed all of the changes in the user experience tied to it. And then we would allow we basically went through phases. We did an internal beta release, and so that was really set towards a limited set of users internally that could use the new experience. And then we broadened that out to an internal GA release, and so then everyone inside of Datasite would get the experience from dev all the way to production. And during this whole time, we're still pushing out new enhancements and features to that. Again, using our standard deploy process and LaunchDarkly. And then eventually, when we felt really confident with the experience we had, that it felt very crisp and clean and complete, we then started to release it to our customers. So we identified a limited set of customers that we'd called limited availability, and we targeted them actually just based upon their browsers being set to English. Because we didn't have all our translations done for the 14 languages we support, but we wanted to make that big impact again, right? We wanted to give it to our customers, release it with our marketing material all at the same time, but we didn't have all the translations in a way that we felt really confident with. And so we actually targeted English users for that limited availability group only and gave it to them and started getting feedback. As the translations for our languages started to get complete, we started to open it up. So we went from limited availability English only to then GA for English and gave it to all customers. At the same time, again, the old look's still up and running. Users can use that if they want, but the new look is what everyone's getting as default. And then eventually we said, hey, let's put everybody on the new look. We'll go from, so whether it was any language, any of the 14 would get the new look experience. And still, again, we wanted to make sure our customers were safe. Back to managing risk, our customers can get very, very upset when they work 12 to 20 hours a day during high or very important projects. And so they can get obviously very upset or could impact their job if our software fails to enable them to do their job. So we gave them the ability to go back to the old look. And that's how we ended up managing the risk, was having the parallel availability of both, allowing them to go back, but slowly and gradually converting everybody over to the new look over a period of time.
That's really interesting. Did they self-serve themselves back to the old look, or how was that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, we allowed that. What we did, again, we were very concerned about managing the risk around this, and so we gave them the new look, and we gave them multiple ways to get back to the old look. And it would be from the first place they presented the new look, we would walk them through how the new look works first, because they're like, what is this? You know, shock, here's a new experience. But then we would also give them the ability to say, hey, I'd like to go back to the old look. And then we would actually ask them, well, why are you wanting to go back? So we could use that feedback on what did they not like or what was their situation. And so they could go back to the old look, and we wouldn't stop them from doing that. But we actually had really high adoption rates, which for us was, we were very impressed and shocked at the same time. It was somewhere around like 85, 90% adoption when we first rolled it out. And so only a few customers went back, and a lot of the responses were, I'm in the middle of a project, I don't have time to learn something new right now, right? Which I think everyone can relate to, whether it's us on our phones as not in the middle of a project, like, I don't want the new experience, to, a professional in the middle of their job getting a new experience while they're trying to just complete a task. And so that was the main response. And over time, I think those people started to adopt it because they're like, okay, hey, I can breathe, I can take on this new experience, and it wasn't so overwhelming. But that is how we gave them the freedom to go back to the old experience if they chose to do so.
That's awesome. That's a really interesting example of a progressive release and kind of a very robust example of that. Thank you for sharing. Krista, anything else you want to add to that around your release process?
I have a question for you on, when you talked about the decision point of like when a flag gets created, it sometimes is left up to like developer judgment. So help me understand, because everyone perceives risk, I think, a little bit differently. From my perspective, we're collectively talking about, hey, we're going to release like X client-facing feature. It's got to go in a flag. So what are the types of conversations that you have with the dev teams to really understand their approaches?
That's a great question, and we have that conversation a lot actually internally. The developers do have a ton of freedom back to kind of managing their risk. I think we've tried to put a lot of things in place that give them that autonomy and freedom, but also have practiced, we blow up production. All right, well, hey, let's learn from that, and therefore we don't make the same mistake twice, so to speak. So how do we then go about allowing developers to manage their own flags? Well, for like the new look, it actually started with multiple different flags. Right, back to kind of self-manage. Yeah. So it was like, hey, I'm on this team, I've got my changes, they need to go to production, I'm gonna create a flag, and this is for my team's changes. And then another team would do it, and another team, right? And we ended up with flag proliferation basically for one release. We ended up, it was just kind of like, we all kind of got together, hey, wait a second, this isn't working, it's complicating stuff. Let's create one global flag, put all the changes under that. And so I think it wasn't like there was a person who's like, I got to make that decision. It was more of having the autonomy but trust aspect of our leaders to come to that conclusion on their own and make that decision, knowing what we all stand for from a culture perspective, back to minimizing the risk. Cool. But I'm curious, how does that work for you guys?
I mean, typically, like our status quo is you're going to introduce like a major client-facing, feature. We'll wrap it in a flag, or we've got some standards. If we're going to swap out different API versions, we'll control it via flags. There are some standard patterns, although may not be documented. There are things that like the team practices. In recent conversations that we've been having with our SE at LaunchDarkly, there's appetite for us to release our code every release and really ensure that it's all wrapped behind a flag. I'm excited because we've got some developers that are really advancing that effort. So I think we'll see more of it, and it will, I imagine it'll kind of similar to how you've described your team's ownership and trust of just ensuring that things are appropriately mitigated in terms of risk.
Yeah, I like that. I like the API one too. I love APIs, by the way. And so when you say you're managing your changes that way, I think that's great, right? Because it's not just about the front end. Right? Like it goes kind of top to bottom as far as mitigating the risk when we're releasing. Would you agree with that?
I think so. I mean, the advantage, I see on being able to manage the API versions is you can have your client still call the same thing and have your backend change reference whatever your different sources or whatever. So there are some big ones there. I know a lot of times when we're talking about LaunchDarkly, we're talking client-facing changes, but there's a lot more power there. So.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, it made me think of something. We've had engineers and we didn't know this at the time, it's like back to they kind of get to make their own decisions in a lot of ways. They're making a change in the database. And so they would use LaunchDarkly to actually change the back end on how it was going to flow, even though it had nothing to do with the front end, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think the neat thing about being able to do feature flags is is that it gives engineers the ability to go, hey, I want to manage the risk, because they also, for us anyways, we didn't talk about this earlier, but for us, we can get paged 24/7, so we have an on-call rotation. And so engineers and leaders, including myself, can get paged at 3 in the morning to get on and fix a problem because production is down, all right, or a key user experience flow is impacted. And so back to, we don't want our customers to be impacted, but we also feel the pain. And so in that regard of feeling the pain, it's like, okay, I want to make changes, I want to be an engineer, I want to get them out to production quickly, but I also don't want to be woken up at 3 a.m., right? And so then they yeah, right? So then they kind of just start to, at least for us, they started to kind of take that ownership of saying, I can manage my own risk, and I've got tools I can do so. I can do pure engineering brute force, which sometimes is just required, or I can use something like feature flags and really kind of manage it the way I want.
Absolutely. You both touched on so many interesting things there. Thank you for that. So to the point of APIs and databases, we've used at LaunchDarkly, we've used LaunchDarkly for our own database migration. And we've started to talk to more customers who we're uncovering these different use cases and applications of the platform, and backend changes, API updates, cloud migrations are an emerging one. We're actually going to have a separate summit just about migration because it's such a growing use case, and we want people to know that you can use feature flags, not just for the front end, but for backend changes as well.
Yeah, if we can actually touch on that for a moment, because I was thinking that too, Mike. It seems to be we're in a space from an evolutionary perspective or a maturity perspective around the SDLC of, we started way back when it was like DevOps, and that was the new big thing. And how do we have dev and operations work together to make changes, go to production quickly, and mitigate risk, right? And it was all about how do you do the delivery and operations and not have these silo effects, which then they're not talking to each other. And I feel like that was one phase of maturity. And as an industry, I think in the software development space, we've really come a long ways in that regards. And then it was DevSecOps. Okay, well, we can't ignore security. And that's also now starting to come to, I think, a maturity phase. And of course, there's always more companies and organizations that can do better at it. But I feel like the next thing, actually, is I see the ability to control your changes. So in other words, in our organization, our marketing department, as an example, and sales department and client services do not go at the same pace we do, and rightfully so. We in the engineering side want to push changes out regularly, 15, 25 times a day, and that's a very natural flow from a development perspective. Whereas, hey, I want to put marketing material in front of a customer, it doesn't happen until they're ready to put it in front of the customer. And they're not ready to put it in front of the customer until the changes in production are available too. Right? And so you don't launch and release to your customers until the changes are there and ready to go. And so I feel like this ability to manage change with like feature flags, whether it's at an infrastructure level, a back end, whether it's on the front end, almost seems like the next maturity phase in how the SDLC works to really streamline the SDLC and reduce the risk on it. That's kind of what I'm seeing happening.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not alone. I think a lot of our customers are starting to find new ways to kind of just manage that risk across all different departments, give teams more control, work in unison, and remove bottlenecks across the SDLC and just the business. So yeah, really interesting conversation. On that note, talking about kind of the growth of feature flags and a platform like LaunchDarkly. Krista, would love to start with you and hear about how long you've been a customer, what your initial use case or reason for adopting LaunchDarkly was, and how that's evolved over time.
Yeah, so we became a customer back in 2019 and implemented it on one product, our online access platform, which is both web and native iOS and Android apps. We primarily used it to really control feature availability and have used it in that fashion for a number of years. Now we've expanded our usage across other products. So our Exchange, which is our commercial platform, also uses LaunchDarkly, as well as our investment platform called StartRight. And so, Scrum teams are actively using that. Every sprint, you can probably count that there are feature flags being added, kind of just continuously as they develop and push out changes. In terms of how we've been continuing our use of the product, we have done a successful POC of enabling the ServiceNow integration, which helps us not only understand when a change went out, but really when it went client-facing. Today we use ServiceNow as our main system of record for our changes, and so now we will have the ability, once we enable it in prod, to really have like full circle understanding when did the code go out, but when was it first touched by a customer. Another facet that we're exploring right now is the workflow capability and being able to schedule changes. And I think that can be a game changer. We've got a number of different use cases and features that we're working on right now that will help us schedule things so that we're not up late at night and can have some trust and confidence in when those things need to be out or published or whatever the use case is. So there's definitely a lot of capabilities that we continue to explore. And I'm excited to continue that. So
awesome. Yeah, the ServiceNow integration is big in financial services and just making sure you're adhering with compliance and change management protocols. And we've found that many customers find that as a way to streamline some of those otherwise like very manual and time-consuming processes. We'll get to you next, Erin, but I'm curious, Krista, what other kind of ecosystem tools are you using aside LaunchDarkly, and how is that benefiting your team?
Yeah, so when we have features that are going out to production, there are a couple different types of tools that we use. We have our APM tools that help us understand just platform health in general, and we'll work with our SREs to really give them a heads up, hey, this is coming down the pipeline, this is what's going out, let us know what kind of changes we might see there. Additionally, we have an experience analytics platform, so that also helps us understand what our clients seeing. So there's a little bit of session replay there, just a percentage of sessions that help us understand for the net new thing or for whatever the change is, how is it performing? Are there any error rates? And then we can use LaunchDarkly to just assess like who's been served, whatever the variation or flag is. So I think with those three tools, we're able to get a pretty robust picture of what the thing looks like out in the wild.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think to that point of just helping teams kind of streamline process, work better together, and combining different workflows that would otherwise be siloed. Sounds like you have a lot of exciting things ahead as well. How about you, Erin? How long have you been a customer? What was your initial intended use of LaunchDarkly? Why did you adopt, and how has that evolved?
Yeah, we've been, actually I had to look it up just the other day. I was like, wait, how long have we been doing this now? And it's been just about 2 years now for us. And it originally started because we were talking about this earlier, like what did we originally have before we used something like LaunchDarkly, right? And I think you guys had like a database and we're using entitlements and something like that, if I remember it correctly. And we were doing something similar. So we had entitlements in a database, and we were kind of misusing that because those entitlements were meant to be around, hey, you have access to this feature, not release control and not risk mitigation. But we started to use it in that way. In addition, on the front end, it was all just built and coded in the front end, and the only way to manage features was to pass around URLs. And so if I wanted to, say, target both use customers for a new experience, I'd have to send you the URL, and then you'd have to use that URL and bookmark it. And if we changed something or added, let's say we wanted to add a new enhancement to that, let's go back to the new look, add a new enhancement in there and now have you guys be a part of the limited availability, I'd have to give you a new URL probably, right? And if I wanted more customers, I'd have to give them that. And then when we want to shut that down, I have to tell you to delete the bookmark, right? And so, and in addition, the front end and back end weren't in sync. We would have the back end not able to push their changes out because they didn't have a way of managing that change. And the front end could freely push it out. So we would find ourselves in a situation where production, you couldn't test a lot of these new features in production because the back end wasn't there. And so you would have to test in the development environment. Well, that didn't work out very well when you want to give it to a customer that doesn't have access through your private network to then use that environment. And so we'd start to find ourselves in kind of just these situations we weren't real keen on. And so that was kind of where we were at. And we kind of continued to grow, continue to evolve, wanting to do more releases and more teams, and kind of just through the expansion and growth of Datasite, it was like, how are we going to address this? I don't remember how I stumbled upon it, but I just started kind of Googling and trying to figure out what options are there other than building your own. Because you could totally build a full-fledged solution around feature management and release management, but then there's the competing factor of, well, then you have to allocate people to that and manage it and make it available. And if you rely on that to reduce your risk, now this uptime for this feature management solution, you now have to make sure that has high uptime. If not, if something goes wrong, you could impact your experience that you were actually trying to de-risk. Right. And so I stumbled upon LaunchDarkly actually, like I said, about 2 years ago. And at first I thought, wow, what a great tool to get product and our delivery management involved. We have these quarterly plannings, we have releases we're trying to target, products very keen on ensuring that those objectives and priorities are getting out. Delivery management is as well, and they're coordinating across the organization. And I was like, well, it sounds like they would be a great group of people that would want to use this. I was actually a little wrong, but in a good way, because not that they didn't care, they just were a lot more focused on what is important to deliver, not how we deliver it. And that's where the engineers actually really were very, very interested in this concept, because they're like, hey, wait a second, all of these problems that we have from an engineering and delivery perspective, we can simplify, and we don't have to build it from scratch, and we don't have to operationalize it and support it. This seems really slick. Oh wait, and there's these SDKs we can just use to plug in and start using. And so where it actually started was a little POC and a demo, and some of our staff engineers that reviewed it and put some eyes on it, and we're like, hey, this thing has some legs to it, and we could take advantage. So we started out with about 25 seats. And within the first 3 months, everyone was on that, and so we were out of seats. And I had many people asking me for more, and I was like, okay, hey boss, can we get some more seats, because it's got some good adoption and seems to have traction with our engineers. So then we were at like 50 seats within 3 months. And then within 9 months, it was like, okay, obviously it's getting a lot of attraction and adoption in the engineering group. They're finding value in it. They're using it for a lot of their changes. And so then we really bumped it up and went to over 100 seats for our engineers. And of course, anybody can use it. So UX, product management, delivery management. But again, the group that really kind of drove it and adopted it was engineering. And it's because we were trying to solve a delivery issue. And an engineering issue was really the crux for what was our biggest pain. And so that's kind of how it all got started for us. Most recently, though, going back to our new look release, we actually had, I was doing some kind of like, call it pair programming, in LaunchDarkly with one of our delivery managers on how are we going to phase the rollout of this release to our limited availability customers, English only, other languages. And so we actually had delivery management in LaunchDarkly with me, and we were doing it together. And so I'm starting to see some other adoption and interest in it. But what I find really interesting is in your situation, you guys are using a lot of the integrations, it sounds like, or at least like with ServiceNow and some of the other ones. I thought we might, and we've not used any of them yet. And so
ours aren't fully live yet, but we've done the POCs. I think there's appetite. We just need to, talk about some processes probably to
Sure.
really make it happen. But.
No, that makes sense. I'm curious, you mentioned about using APMs and having that kind of tied into your releases. Can you say more about that? I'm curious how that works together.
So I wouldn't say that there's like an immediate integration between the tools, but it is like another tool set that is pulled up during the release process. So we've got eyes on how the platform is behaving with the net new feature add. So it's really that. And the same can be done from a experience analytics perspective too. So typically what we'll do, we'll walk through and test, build out our either conversion funnel or report. We use a tool called Glassbox. And it helps us really understand, what to expect in production. So we just map out the entire user flow or change and then port it over to production. And once that thing goes live and LaunchDarkly, we can look at both of those things to really understand, how are we doing and are there any potential hotspots? Because I haven't talked about this yet, but we do release typically incrementally. So we will typically release on the consumer side for our online access platform to an internal employee beta group, which gives, it's kind of exciting. As an employee, you get to go kind of see what the team's been building. So we've got folks that will participate in that, use the new features, provide us feedback. And at times, we get material feedback where we want to go change something before it gets in our customers' hands. So we can still leverage, again, those APM tools and Glassbox to help us understand their production experience, particularly if there's an issue, detect some hotspots, and then go back and iterate. And again, LaunchDarkly just helps us understand and target who's next.
Erin, and I know everyone's got different setups. For you, if you're interested or others interested, we do actually, LaunchDarkly does integrate with most of the major APM tools. So you can track flag changes in your APM tool and really understand the cause of an error. Part of our workflows functionality also enables you to automatically turn a flag off in the event that an error is tied to, or you hit a certain metric. So there are automations and integrations as well, but I think this just speaks to kind of the vast, the breadth of benefits, really, with all the different ecosystem tools and feature flags in general.
Yeah, I agree. We've played around a little bit with the Slack integration, so you can see when flags are modified, and you can kind of have that information without going into the tool itself. But I also think really it's like, it doesn't matter It matters to the organization. We're all trying to de-risk our releases, and we're going to do it in slightly different ways. Right, like we do a lot of things very similarly, but we do some things that are also just a little bit different. But they work for your organization and your culture, right? And ours work for our organization and our culture. And I think that the individualism, not just on a personal level, but like at an organization level, I think plays a big role in how we use these tools.
Agreed, absolutely. It sounds like you have used LaunchDarkly in really interesting ways and still have a lot of room to grow, which is awesome. Speaking of growth and adoption across teams, curious to hear, Krista, let's start with you. How has the use of LaunchDarkly impacted developer experience at BOK?
I would say it's helped us be more creative in terms of how we want to go about architecting a solution, or even designing a solution and how we might want to release that thing. We're talking about 2 different features right now where we're going to have a decent amount of the logic, housed in LaunchDarkly and controlled so that we can, for example, post messages to customers that maybe are on an older OS version. We want them to upgrade so that they can then take on new app versions that we release. And so in general, I think what's interesting is when we have a particular feature that we're wanting to release, we state, here's the problem, here's the scope of what we'd like to do. LaunchDarkly is in the mix now, and I think it's cool to have that from like a dev tool belt perspective to like really think, how do I enable this capability? How much dev do I need to do? Who can do the heavy lifting? Does LaunchDarkly make sense? And so I do think it's been an interesting thing for them to get more exposure to. I think we've got several devs that are very interested in learning more about it, and they're now becoming kind of like a catalyst and champions for the product adoption. So in general, I think it's creating more excitement and just seeing the value of how it can help us in solving problems is where I see it being the most impactful.
I love your answer around the developers are then able to get more creative on how they release. To me, that kind of, I think, goes with the question really well in the sense of the developer experience, right? Because we were talking a little earlier they want to. You don't really take a survey, I don't anyways, at our job. Hey, do you enjoy this? Or is this working out for you or not, right? But the fact that they're adopting it and they're getting creative with it, I think really speaks to the fact that engineers are finding it useful, because otherwise they'd be like, I don't want to use it. It makes my job harder. It's not making it any easier. If you mandate it, okay, fine, I will, because you mandate it. But if you're not mandating it and they're adopting it and they're getting creative, then to me that really speaks to the fact of how much the developer experience is improving.
And I think you both mentioned the 3 a.m. pages. I'm sure that adds to a little bit of quality of life to not have to worry about getting up and fixing something, whether it's via scheduling or someone else being able to turn off a flag. We hear that a lot as well. So,
yeah, if I can just touch on that for a moment. We were talking a little earlier as a group, and we were getting paged, like what was happening to us is we would get paged. As an example, I'm a manager, I'd be on call just like the engineers are, and I'd have a rotation. And anything that went wrong in production, so if you've got 10, 20 teams, anything that went wrong, if it escalated, I was getting paged. Whereas the engineers were getting paged if it was just on their team and in their area, or we needed their support to figure it out. And so what I think that did was create a lot of accountability, right? As a manager, I want to ensure and do what I can to support the teams and making sure they're successful in their SDLC, how they release software, and also remediating the issue in production. And engineers, I think, and this goes for then every piece of it, from app support to quality assurance to DevOps, we're all on a call together at 3 in the morning, and we're all feeling the pain together and going, man, none of us really want that again. So we learn from those experiences. I think what something like LaunchDarkly has really done for us is back to the adoption piece. Our engineers use it all the time, and a lot of the mentality now is it's like, hey, you're releasing this thing. Let's talk about the risk mitigation. What's your deployment strategy going to look like? What's your rollback strategy going to look like? And if the engineer goes, yeah, we've got it behind a feature flag, then everyone's like, okay, no worries. Just, you can do that because we know that it's going to go back safely. And I think to that adoption and the developer experience, they're really, they're adopting it, they find it useful, and it's even building confidence in everyone who's involved with it.
Yeah, we had a customer recently say that LaunchDarkly was their trapeze net for releases, or safety net. That's something we hear a lot, is confidence and just, feeling like you can push changes without the fear of taking down your whole application and making your customers mad, and all the implications that come with that. So
yeah, I love that analogy. Actually, I didn't think about it from a trapeze net, but that's kind of what it's like. I mean, you push a change out. I don't know how quickly you guys can roll back, but we didn't have the ability to press a button and be done. So rollbacks at first were painful in the early days, and we developed our processes and systems to get really quick at it. Back to, we tagged an artifact, we know that's the last good known artifact, so we can quickly press a button from a CI/CD perspective and say, hey, deploy the last good known change, and that allows really fast rollbacks. However, you still have to then deploy that to all of the locations. And we're a global company, multiple regions. So if you're thinking Australia and EMEA and the United States or North America, then those changes need to be deployed across all those areas, multiple nodes. And so then that takes time, right? And so even though you can be really quick at it, that takes time. And for us, LaunchDarkly has, back to the confidence piece, it's like, hey, I can push this out, and if I need to, and it's behind a flag, I literally turn the flag off. And across all of them everywhere it's reverted, so to speak, or turned off. And we've had, I think that helps with the developer experience a lot.
Awesome, glad to hear it. So last question here, we'll give a little bit of advice to our audience. Krista, we'll start with you. What have been your biggest lessons learned throughout your journey with LaunchDarkly, and what advice do you have for leaders who are looking to adopt something like LaunchDarkly?
So we've got, much like your company, we've got a lot of different roles on the teams. It's very cross-functional. We've got UX designers, developers, QE, TAs, POs, project managers. You name all the acronyms, we probably have it on the team. And what I would say is design with the end in mind. Really think about what problems you're solving, how you might need flexibility and control with your release. Get some really good feedback from your stakeholders who have got a lot of skin in the game, and they might have perspectives on what's okay and what's not okay in terms of targeting and slow roll and all that fun stuff. So definitely start with the end in mind, have those conversations up front, include the dev team. I think they are critical in helping us right size the solution. I think the advice that I would give to others looking at a product like this is, first, I guess, do you understand your current release and deployment processes? Do you understand what your team's pain points are, what opportunities there are? Because LaunchDarkly could help solve some of those problems. Now, it's not like a silver bullet, but I think depending on your situation and needs, if you need control and flexibility and a safety net, this product is really helpful in producing that.
Thank you. And Aaron, how about you? What lessons have you learned, and what advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar in a lot of ways, right? I made the early mistake of thinking, hey, product and delivery management would find this really useful because they're having pain points, and they were, but really the bigger pain points were on the engineering side. And so I think to your point of knowing, hey, what does your process look like? How do you go about deploying and releasing software? If you understand that, know where your pain points are, then a tool like LaunchDarkly, you can probably find out, hey, how can this fit in and smooth things out? I agree, it's not a silver bullet, right? You can't fix all of your release problems with something like LaunchDarkly. However, you can improve it. And I think that's an important piece. The other one is, if you know where your problems are in your release and deployment, and you know where there's problems to be solved, then go after those. So for me, it was really the most of our problems were around the engineering, deployment and release process. Not the engineers themselves, but our pain was back to front end and back end and feature flags being disconnected, and how do we get these out to production in a safe manner. That was our pain point, and it was repetitive, and it was daily, and so there was a lot of pain there. It was kind of hidden because the engineers in QA and SREs would kind of just fight through it and make it all work, and everyone outside of engineering just kind of saw the end result. I was like, hey, you guys got it up, fantastic, let's go do it again, right? Yeah. And so, but if you dig into it and you find out where the pain points are, then you'll identify whether a tool like LaunchDarkly will solve your problems and can actually be adopted as well.
Absolutely. Great advice on both of your part. Krista, Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you everyone for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this panel and hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions.